I wish you warmly welcome to this third day of Aboagora and to this morning Agora lecture, which will be given by Helena Ranta. Her topic will be the burden of transgenerational memory. My name is Maarit Eskelä-Kärki and I'm one of the organizers, and I will be chairing this morning session. How can the vicious circle of hatred and revenge, which is so easily transmitted to future generations, be broken? In his play, Ajax, Sophocles focused on the trauma of war and the possibility of forgiveness. Could Ajax, who had turned against his own fellow fighters, be buried in a dignified manner? The process of transmission of transgenerational trauma is unconscious. Grandparents and parents have no intention to pass it on to their offspring, and yet children have heard and listened to something and have sensed an odd speechlessness, the conspiracy of silence. The burden has severe consequences on the individuals and their community by impeding the ability to reconcile and function. How could you forget atrocities, live side by side with your perpetrator, and forgive? Two countries with traumatic experiences and post-conflict consequences will be presented here today by Helena Ranta. In 1918, immediately after Finland had declared independence, a civil war broke out. The death toll of the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia, and particularly the Bosnian War of 1992-95, reached 200,000 individuals. Professor Helena Ranta has been working in conflict areas since 1996. Her missions as a war crimes investigator and member of forensic fact-finding teams have taken her all over, to Peru, Colombia, Cameroon, Libya, Eritrea, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, Iraq, Russia, Chechnya, Afghanistan, and Nepal. She has officially retired in 2011, but it seems that she's really active all the time. In 2014, she spent time in Kosovo setting up forensic service system and training program. Professor Ranta has received the Cross of Liberty First Class, the Cross of St. Henry, and the Lysistrata Peace Prize last year. I wish you warmly welcome Helena Ranta to give your talk.
Imagine I was not here. How would you describe me? What would you learn from me? How would you remember me? Remember, remember, remember. How many times do we say it? But what do you want to remember? Who? Where? How? Why? Remembrance is 99% forgetfulness and only 1% of reworked narrative of someone else's experiences. Thus, it's not what we remember, but what we must not forget that's crucial. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, These questions and thoughts are reminiscences from January 2004, from a discussion forum in Stockholm, Sweden. The Swedish government had organized a series of annual seminars on genocide. And this last seminar in 2004 was entitled Preventing Genocide, Threats and Responsibilities. In his opening address, the United Nations Secretary General, Kofi Annan, who just passed away, once again apologized for the passive role of the United Nations forces in Rwanda in the spring 1994. The UN forces had received detailed plans of the approaching humanitarian catastrophe in advance, in good time. And General Dallaire, who had gone through these plans, had asked the UN headquarters in New York to amend the mandate of the UN forces so that his peacekeepers could confiscate the traditional machete knives. The UN headquarters refused, and something like 800,000, possibly even a million people, mostly Tutsis, were killed. General Dallaire resigned later, became a senator, and has repeatedly referred to his traumatic experiences. He suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, and in 2000, he attempted suicide. Today, he is active in raising awareness for war veterans' mental health. He has written several books. The first one was entitled Shake Hands with the Devil, The Failure of Humanity in Rwanda. This book was published in 2003. General Dallaire and the former chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, Louis Arbour, both accidentally from Canada, and Professor Manfred Novak from Ludwig Boltzmann Institute for Human Rights in Vienna, in Austria, have had great influence in my life. Having myself been working as a war crimes investigator at the grassroots level, their experiences and knowledge have helped me in trying to understand and live with my own memories from conflict areas. And I'm extremely thankful to them. How to break the vicious circle of hatred and revenge, circulus vitiosus, which is so easily passed to the future generations. Is it possible, or is it even desirable, to forget the past atrocities and look toward the future? How to live with the dreadful memories and yet maintain your mental stability? Many people have to do that because they have survived. Who, where, how, why? It's not what we remember, but what we must not forget that's crucial. In his play, Aeneas, Sophocles, who lived in 496 to 406 before current era, ponders the trauma and consequences of war and the possibility of forgiveness. The play presents, in fact, an image of total degradation. Aeneas is a traditional hero. He wants to gain everything, cannot accept defeat, and is finally perished. Probably today we would call him a war criminal. And now to the theme of this seminar. Thence come maidens, much knowing, 3 from the hall, which under that tree stands. Urd hight the one, the second Verdandi. On the tablet they graved. Skuld, burden, the third. Laws they established. Life allotted to the sons of men. Destinies pronounced. Urd, fate, the past, something that became. Verdandi, becoming. Skuld, burden, future. And at this point, I wish to emphasize that I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a psychiatrist, not a lawyer, and definitely not an expert on cultural history. Skuld refers to something that should happen in the future as a consequence of the past. The process of transmission of past experiences and transgenerational trauma is more or less unconscious. Grandparents and parents have no intention to pass on them to their offspring, either knowingly or unknowingly. Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Peace Laureate in 1986, referred to the memory and remembering in his speech, Hope, Despair, and Memory, in Oslo, with these words, and I quote, "Remembering is a noble and necessary act. Without memory, our existence would be barren and opaque, like a prison into which no light penetrates. Like a tomb which rejects the living." It is true that we cannot build our future on the rejection of the past. It has also been said that the memory of evil and death serves as a shield against evil and death. There are moments, of course, when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest. Throughout the history, those in power have subjected people who discuss and question, like writers, scientists, and intellectuals, to torture, persecution, humiliation. Yet we have to show courage and forget our comfortable role as passive onlookers. There are 2 sets of decision makers: those who decide to make war and those who follow the developments, keep their meetings, express their concerns, send their cables, and finally decide to do nothing. We have to remember that silence is a form of words, inaction, an act of complicity. Research has, for understandable reasons, focused on the survivors of the Holocaust, their children and grandchildren. Expressions such as conspiracy of silence, redeem and liberate the ghosts of the grandparents' generation, freeing the father from the prison of the present, and effectively giving them space to live again, are frequently used. Today, not only how transmission of transgenerational trauma takes place, but also the understanding the exact nature of outcome with a special emphasis on the trauma response is important. In the US, intergenerational transmission of combat-related trauma has been studied among veterans of Korean and Vietnam wars by assessing the impact of the father's post-traumatic stress disorder in family life. The PTSD mechanisms, how transgenerational trauma are transferred from the first generation of trauma survivors to the second and further generations are extremely complex. I have chosen 2 examples of national tragedies, which for personal reasons are important to me, namely my own country, Finland, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. In late 1917, Finland declared independence, and in 1918, a civil war broke. When I went to school in 1950s and 1960s, I was far better informed of the Greek and Roman history than the recent history of my own country. Today, I believe, my generation and myself, we are much wiser, but we have to ask why we were not told about what really happened 100 years ago. The total death toll of the short Finnish civil war was very high, 37,000. The whites won the war, and their loss mounted up to 5,000. Altogether, 27,000 Reds lost their life, and of them, 13,000 due to hunger and diseases. The deep wounds which this civil war left have healed, but the scars are still present in the families, in the memory of the families who lost their loved ones, and also in the collective memory of our own nation. I cannot go into details of the historical reasons of the war, but I would like to quote a Finnish professor emeritus in family therapy and psychoanalyst Jukka Aaltonen. He has written a collection of essays, The Shadow of a Kid, which was published in 2009. In one of the essays, entitled My Grandfather's Grave in Internet and How to Ask the Children, he analyzes in a very touching way his feelings and emotions after having read Desmond Tutu's book No Future Without Forgiveness, which describes the work of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. After having read Desmond Tutu's book, he went into internet, because in March 2002, a list of those who lost their lives in the Civil War in 1918 was published in internet after intensive national research project. And I quote, "My grandfather was one of them. He died in Hennala, Lahti. A relative told later to my father that he had been sitting on a plank and plucked lice off his shirt, and then suddenly fell to the ground. He had suffered either of typhoid fever or typhus. He was buried in a common grave with no names. I found my grandfather's name in the list with a note, died for illness on June the 5th, 1918. I felt as if I was standing by his grave, and I started to cry. The grave from the past, nearly 85 years after his death, was there, in front of me, on the screen of my computer. I thought of the sorrow my own father could not have experienced, because for him there was no grave, no name. I cried for the sorrow of my father's orphanhood, and for all that he had transmitted to me of his sorrow. And I wish I could forgive. It could possibly be revealing for my own personal history. But who to forgive? I could forgive him who would ask me for forgiveness. He would be of my age, possibly a grandchild of a prison guard in Lahti in 1918. He may have heard something from his parents, or had sensed this strange speechlessness, conspiracy of silence, which is still present in villages and communities, with the memories of the past terror in 1918. Silence is persistent, as are the memories, despite the fact that the perpetrators have met their victims a long time ago, underground. End of quote. Only a couple of years ago, I learned that after the Civil War, a relative of my mother had worked in a prison camp. He was a journalist, but in the camp, he acted as a judge and gave death sentences to the prisoners. It is documented that he personally executed prisoners. The letters he wrote to his wife are today in our National Archive. After having read them, I felt not only deep sorrow, but disgust. He had enjoyed killing the Reds. Next year, in 1919, he committed suicide. A friend of mine, a psychologist, has studied collective memory and forgetfulness, and I quote again, "Remembering is as if we were to invite the past, the present, and the future to this very moment. Collective memory and collective forgetting are characterized by their political nature. When the serious consequences of traumatic experiences are given publicity, the politics related to remembering and trauma would be possible. Thus, we can talk of the politics of remembering. My second example comes from the early stages or early moments of the Bosnian War, when the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia started. With the permission of the Kino Company, who is present also here today, with their kind permission, we will see now some extracts from a documentary which shows or tells about a young man, Esad, who worked as a prison guard in a prison camp in Bosnia. He is a Muslim, and the prisoners were Croatians and Serbs. As background information, I would like to inform you that this film was made possible, this documentary, by collaboration with the Danish film director Peter Ten, who contacted by email some of the war criminals that had been given sentences in The Hague, at the Hague Tribunal. Esad was the only one who was willing to collaborate. And this is a collaboration of a Danish-Finnish collaboration. And as I said, the film Kino Company kindly agreed that I could show these film extracts to you. Esad did not represent himself only as an individual. He also represented his community. And the victims, they represented not only themselves, but also their own communities. So in fact, when we are looking at the whole process of forgiveness and remembering, we have actually 4 actors involved. And it is surprising how loyal an individual member of a community can be. He's able to, or he can, sacrifice even his own life, his reputation, to obey orders that are given. One of the survivors wrote, "I do not know what will happen after I die, but I'm not going to the heaven. I'm not going to the hell. Instead, I will go to the hearts of the people I love and will do good deeds." Margaret Drabble, a British novelist, has called the 20th century a beastly century. And it is indeed a beastly century. The minimum of 220 million people lost their lives during the century. The traditional wars disappeared when we approached the millennium, the end of the millennium. Instead, we had different types of civil wars, ethnic rensing, and so on. Finally, I would like to go back to genocide. Genocide is not an act of murder. It's thousands, millions of acts of murder. Genocide is a black hole in the spectrum of all reasoned thought, the ultimate loss of humanity. We must not believe that the Holocaust could not happen again. No wars, no mass atrocities, no human rights violations, no crimes against humanity take place by accident. And there is always time to react. The problem is our unwillingness to react. These atrocities happen because there are people who want them to happen, people who are willing to conduct them, and people who allow them to happen, as the onlookers. We must not forget the survivors. They have lost their loved ones. They possibly feel guilty because they have survived. Why did I survive and lost my wife, my husband, my son, my daughter? The survivors have the right to know what has happened. They have to learn to live with their memories from the past, and they have to rebuild their life and their broken societies. Don't forget the survivors. They are our teachers, and they only help us.
I know that, like myself, you all are a bit overwhelmed at the moment, probably, and I guess many of these Agora lectures this year and these panels and workshops that we have had have aroused many emotions, many difficult emotions, but I think that we have also had many good discussions here, and I feel that it has been a good surrounding to discuss these difficult matters as well. So I hope you feel able and free to express your thoughts and ideas after this Helena's lecture. So, are there any comments right away that you would like to pose?
That you mentioned early on in your presentation that you knew more about Greek and Roman history than you knew about the Finnish Civil War, and I wonder how you explain that. Why did it happen in Finland that the Civil War was not talked about, and what did it do to you personally, and can you see some larger ramifications that it had in Finnish society?
I think we could discuss these issues for hours and days. As I said, these two examples which I showed or I told about, you understand that they were personally very important to me. Because we started our work in Srebrenica, and that was my first mission to conflict areas. I was curious, and I had no previous knowledge of the reasons of this conflict. So this has been a very long learning process for me. And of course, as an outsider, as a foreigner, it was much easier for me to work in Bosnia-Herzegovina and other places. But then when it comes to our own country, to our own civil war, so I put it in my lecture very smoothly. We didn't know too much. But I blame our system, our society, for not allowing us to know already in 1950s, 1960s, what really had happened. And you may understand it was actually a shock when I learned that my mother's relative was one of the judges with no legal background. For me, he was only a man who had written, together with my grandfather, our family history, a name in a book, a picture. Somebody told me later that yes, he committed a suicide. His wife was pregnant at that time. And actually I have met one of his relatives now, later, lives fairly quite near me. It course, he's only a man in a history. But it just shows that this is a demonstration of that we all have these connections. I have met during this year, when we have commemorated the 100 years from the Civil War, I have been speaking in several seminars, and I was also attending the memorial service in Tammisaari, where I think some 5,000 prisoners lost their lives because of hunger and diseases. Several books have been published of that. The reasons for this silence, this conspiracy of silence, They are very, very complex, and I'm not able to analyze them in detail, but I think that the Second World War, the Winter War particularly, raised a curtain so that even then we were unable to go through these tragic moments in our own history. And it's now only recently that several books have been published. I think the role of Finnish historians in giving us now different explanations, different reasons, going through the developments in already before our independence and immediately after the independence and after the Civil War. I think we are getting a more comprehensive picture of our own history, and I think that is good. What is important is that we have to understand that you can't hide the truth. One day the truth will come to the daylight. I wish it would have come a bit earlier, already when I went to school, because I have no use of knowing something about Greek or Roman history, because I'm not a historian. I should have been far better informed of my own history. And as I said, I'm only a war crimes investigator. So I'm looking for the truth, finding evidence. It's not my task to act as a judge. I have to be very, very careful not making any comments on the possibility who is guilty. Questions of guilt, that they belong to legal institutions, not to a single investigator or her group. I'm afraid I can't give you better answers.
More questions, comments? Yes.
Thank you very much. I think this is an acute concern we have to realize as at the university and also at the schools. So I realized actually this year that how terrifyingly little I know about the Bosnian War and Yugoslavia. I went to school in the 1990s, and actually to my class came 2 boys from Kosovo. But the Yugoslavian crisis and wars never entered school curriculum, not in the 1990s, not at the university last decade when I studied history. And so actually I never ever in school or university heard anything about that. And so I think in the future we should be careful to include these tremendous crises that touch us into our teaching curriculum. For example, the Syrian crisis now very soon to what we teach at the university and at school, because the next generation will have amongst them people who come from these conflict areas, and it's part of our common experience.
You started by referring to how did you know about the dissolution of the Yugoslav Republic. I have to confess that in 1995, I stayed a month in Prague, in Prague, very close to Srebrenica. I knew that something was going on there, but I didn't pay any attention to that. I thought it was too complex for me, and I had nothing to do with that. So I thought, well, they are fighting there, even though they were fighting in Europe. Bosnian War broke off already in 1992, and ended in 1995 when the Dayton Peace Agreement was signed. And Milosevic was among his name is there, and he was one of the signatories. And he was praised by the world as a peacemaker. I don't know how much people knew about what had happened the previous summer in Srebrenica. And then, because of the initiative of Elisabeth Rehn in 1996, so she visited Srebrenica and the surrounding mountains, and she saw all those people who were killed, and their remains were lying there on the ground. So when she came back to Finland, she brought up an issue of doing something, at least something. And that's how we went to Srebrenica in March 1996. And this is, as I said, our first mission. Since then we have been working in several other places, and I have learned to sort of follow now what is going on in the world, even though I have retired. And so there are several conflicts which I, in a way, more or less follow even today. Particularly the one which is going on in Syria. I have been involved in a way some of the negotiations not in Syria, but I have met the representatives of the Syrian opposition, which is very, very, in a way there are several fractions within the Syrian opposition. And the only advice that I could give to them was that do not touch anything. Don't do any clandestine investigations. Just collect information. Who has disappeared, the names, the clothing, where, and try to get that information out of the country. Because that information will be needed one day. The war there must be a stop one day, even in Syria, even though today it seems very, very difficult. I'm very happy that students, in fact, are very interested and they are keen on following what's happening in the world at a global level. And I wish I had been also active earlier when I went to school or when I was a young student. Because I believe that we can do much better, much more than what we do actually. We can put pressure on our decision makers so that our politicians, and I'm not referring only to Finnish politicians, but also globally, that people have to react because these atrocities, the target of all these atrocities are civilians, our fellow people. We have a responsibility to react.
Thank you, we really do, we sometimes feel so desperate because it's so difficult, because it's so much easier to close one's eyes and go home and go and hide yourself from these terrible things. You've been working in so many places, and one of the places you've been working in is Peru. And I think that is a bit less known of these terrible atrocities that have happened in the world. At least I think in Finland people know much less about the situation in Peru than, for instance, nowadays in Bosnia. Could you tell us about what you did in Peru and what happened in there?
Peru was, I think that was the first time when I felt that I was in a way welcome to a country, to a target state. In Peru, there were years of violence, 1980 to 2000, and the violence, actually it was the governmental forces, the military, and two organizations. You may call them fighters for freedom or terrorists, depends on which side you are. Tupac Amaru was a small one, and the Shining Path, Sendero Luminoso, the bigger. The death toll of these 20 years of violence was something between 70 and 75,000. And there are several hundreds of mass graves all around in the Andes. There was, people living in Lima didn't know too much about that because this, the fighting went on among those poor people living in the mountains, not speaking Spanish as their mother tongue. Instead, they spoke Quechua. The problem or the tragedy of missing persons, of course, is one, but there was another silent tragedy, which was then conducted during the second term of President Fujimori in 1995 to 2000. It was an intensive and extensive sterilization program to remove the poverty. And again, that was conducted among the people, the women in fertile age in the Andes, and also some 25,000 men were vasectomized. This sterilization program was not included in our mandate. And finally, in a way, I started to get information from different sources, and I had to be very, very careful because I didn't want to be thrown out of the country as persona non grata. So we were working as an advisors to the Peruvian Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was established immediately after President Fujimori left the country in late 2000. This commission, one of the key actors in establishing the commission was the former UN Secretary General Javier Pérez de Cuellar. And at the beginning of this millennium, he was working as an ambassador in France. And when President Ahtisaari was informed of we received an invitation from the commission. So he arranged a meeting between myself and Javier Pérez de Cuellar. He was already an old man, but I think it was very important to learn how he had experienced these 20 years of violence. It was very clear from the very beginning that we couldn't exhume all the 75 or 70,000 people, the bodies. Instead, we suggested that we will train the Peruvian experts to investigate their own recent history and collect evidence. So we established a master's program in forensic anthropology and bioarchaeology at the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. And believe me or not, I have a chair as a professor at the Pontificia Universidad in forensic anthropology and bioarchaeology. Don't ask me how I was qualified for that. So we set up a program, and some 20 students, all having already a master's degree in some related disciplines, participated. And we have since then, we have continued our collaboration. And today we have a PhD student at the University of Helsinki studying also the Peruvian genome. She is doing DNA work, and we are also sending experts to help the Peruvian colleagues. So that was one of the few moments when I really felt that we were able to do something positive, something which also gave us hope. And I remember when I was visiting the women and the mothers in Ayacucho with a special prosecutor. That was in early 2002. And he suggested that he would he would not come together with me to talk with these women. And I said, definitely you have to come with me, because it's important that you hear their questions, and also it's important that you listen to what I say to them. Well, he resigned fairly soon after that, and afterwards so there have been several special prosecutors. The sad thing is that even though the Peruvian government has made a public apology for the sterilization program, all the trials have been cancelled. Nobody has been taken to the court to meet actually the trial. And yet, the sterilization program, left some 200,000 to 300,000 women unable to get children. And you can just imagine what that means if you think about the future, the age pyramid in the country. 200,000 to 300,000 women were sterilized without informed consent. And this is, to my understanding, the largest sterilization program, accidentally, at the very beginning, financed by the UN and Japanese non-governmental organizations.
Thank you, Helena, for this really powerful and touching speech. I would first like to thank you to bring in the perpetrator story, because this is also trauma and this is also burden, and I think we rarely hear this side. And it needs to be addressed, I would say, in order to proceed with forgiveness and reconciliation. As you worked a lot with very powerful institutions from ICTY and so on, my question is, what do you do as a young person in Bosnia today with elections that are coming on in October, when the state is doing everything to divide young people, so people would never even meet because it's basically apartheid? And all the information that you actually get about the other side is very manipulated only through media. Even though there is a grassroots and bottom-up willingness to reconcile, to move on, basically, after the war, it's kind of not possible because this division is institutionalized. It's really heavily run by state. So there is bottom-up willingness to forgive and to move on, but the state is doing everything to divide. So what is what's the solution?
I think you can hear me. Are you referring to Republika Srpska? And
well, the whole Balkans, I think, are very fragile now with separatist tensions in Kosovo and in Bosnia. So these elections, I think, are really, really dangerous right now.
to be honest, I haven't followed the developments in Bosnia-Herzegovina that closely. I have to confess that. But because I spent a year in Kosovo, so I'm better informed of the developments there. One of the key problems in Bosnia-Herzegovina, if we talk about the whole country, is the presence of international forces. I think you agree with me, because that means that the country is not independent in every way it should be independent. If the international forces were to leave now Bosnia-Herzegovina, I dare not to imagine what would happen. Probably it would be a new chaos. The same does not apply to Kosovo in the same way. Because Kosovo itself is more homogeneous, and we have these enclaves, the Serb enclaves in the north, and then we have the Albanian enclaves in Macedonia, in North Macedonia as well. The situation is not that bad, as I said, but in Bosnia, I couldn't say what to do, what could be done, and I think it's also very important that we, in the future, we have to analyze critically whether the interventions the outside world or the international community has done in Bosnia, for instance, whether these interventions actually have worsened the situation. I have met so many international help peacekeepers and non-governmental organizations, representatives, UN representatives, and for some of them, it doesn't matter which country, what conflict, they're just doing their work. And this is, I think, one of the greatest dangers in working in conflict areas, particularly in conflict in post-conflict situation, that you sort of get fed up, you just do your daily work, and that's it. You don't care about anything else. You are even told not to make friends with local people. You are not even allowed, in some instances, to do that. So, this is, again, one example of the vicious circle. I mean, how to break that? I have no words to that, I'm afraid.
Yes, thank you for your wonderful talk. And you said that we should react by contacting government officials and politicians.
Sorry?
You said that we should react
Yes.
by contacting officials and politicians. What can we do proactively to prevent new atrocities like this as individuals and as communities? How can we stop them from continuing?
If we talk about national politicians today, so I believe that they have something far more important to discuss. People tend to forget, politicians tend to forget. So I think it's us, ordinary people. We have to do something. We have to keep these issues on the agenda. Talk. Unfortunately, this is not. I have got this poem in English, but it is. There's a very, very good Swedish writer. She has already passed away. Who, in her poems, and one of her poems is a Tala, Tala. Tala du som ännu har läppar. We still have an opportunity to talk. We can talk. We haven't been silenced. So that is what we can do, because words can change the world. They can break the walls. They can make the world better. This is the message of her poem. Unfortunately, it hasn't been translated into English. So that's what I'm doing. I try to raise awareness of how important it is that even we, onlookers, that we talk, we question. One of the examples of what we can do, and what I have done once, was at the University of Helsinki. We had a seminar, Historians Without Borders, had a seminar on peacekeeping. And there was the UN Under-Secretary General who had been responsible for peacekeeping operations. And he was talking about lessons learned. And he was praising the UN peacekeepers. I had an opportunity, I had been asked to comment on his speech. And I thanked him very politely at the very beginning of my speech. And then I said, I waited for you to comment on how the UN peacekeepers have made themselves guilty of sexual abuses, and how people who had raised these issues had been fired from their jobs. I mean, this Under-Secretary General didn't talk about something which is a scandal. Lessons learned. There's very much we have to learn from this. And the problem is that some same abuses are taking place in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa. we have to have the courage to talk. That's all I can do.
I would just go back to 1918 and Finland. So it was a big confusion after the Russian revolutions, first revolution, second, and the Bolsheviks took power. So in our country, the workers' movement didn't have any clear program of how to react to revolutions or reforms. But the development in this World War, First World War, so the young men in Finland lost work. They didn't even have money to. They were hungry. They're hungry and they have no future at all. So I think the young men are dangerous if they don't have anything to do. So as long as the old men wouldn't have to fight this. And the women were not so eager to fight, but the young men, when they felt desperate and they had an example of the Bolshevik Revolution, they went out and it was impossible to stop it. I don't want to speak only about the violence of young men, but it's a different group, a special group.
Thank you for raising this issue. You may be aware of the fact that in China, the number of male babies is very high compared to female babies. So there are regions in China, in increasing number, where something like there's 140 boys, 200 girls. And this is what the Chinese authorities are also considering now as a danger, because there will be not enough wives to these 140 boys growing, and the stability of a family life is missing. And these developments in this disparity, there is one country in Europe where we have the same alarming development. Is there anyone who wishes to guess which country? You know? No, the number of boys to girls. We have no sex-selective abortion. But there's one country in Europe where we have this alarming development. Albania. So I'm not saying either that young men are dangerous, but if there are in excessive numbers and they have no future, they get frustrated. There are young men who have left their own countries to join the terrorist organizations because there's no future for them. So this is very complex, but I have no means and no thorough knowledge to analyze these problems or these issues. So I'm a layman or laywoman in this sense.
That was in your last clip where the old grey-haired man turns silently from person who wants to apologize. It was a very powerful statement, but then came the moment of hope when he says to his companion he was really sorry or something like that. The clip was ending.
I have to tell you about these two men that went to meet Assad in the prison camp, in the previous prison camp. The man who was in the first clip, so he was one of the prisoners, a medical doctor, and he actually was the man who talked with the other prisoners. There were several who then finally agreed to meet Assad, but I think he was a psychiatrist, so he joined the other victims when they went to meet Assad. Yes, Esad was something 17, 18. He was a young man. Now he's an old man, he has no future in his own country, because first of all, he agreed that he is guilty. He was sentenced, he served here in Finland, but then he wanted to apologize. So his own community, even his own parents, didn't agree with his decisions. You couldn't see in those films, in the film, the security concerns of the authorities in Bosnia. There was I think even Ari Matikainen, who represents the Kino company, so he wasn't even given access to the site, to the prison camp. I think it was only these two elderly men, Esad and somebody who actually was filming the meeting. So he has no future in Bosnia. He lives now in Finland. But think about, as he said in one of the interviews, or he said that yes, I had psychologists and psychiatrists, some 4 or 5. And in Finland, in fact, he has also been given therapy. What about his victims? No support, no psychological support or anything. So that is their tragedy and their burden as well.
But I just would like to say that this hope which his last words in this clip expressed are seldom present in textbooks. There should be something done, which political party or whose opinions expressed in the textbooks. Finland, to me, is a tragical example of this fact. I have been child in former Czechoslovakia, and I was 6 years old when Stalin has been exposed. And in my class, teacher went with a trash box and said, "Open your book on page 1 and 2, and now we rip Stalin's picture off." You fold it, and you fold it and rip. And we went around the students, and we disposed of Stalin's picture in the trash can. And then I came home, and finally where I lived, grandmother was in tears, saying, "What did they do to Stalin, Father Stalin?" So, same type of dilemma you had here in this 1919. So, it's over and over repeated misinformation of those young people who then go and kill.
Closing the discussion soon, and there have been many difficult questions, and I have had in my mind very difficult questions, which I know that there are no direct answers, but I'm happy and honored, and we are very honored at Aboagora that we had you, Helena Ranta, here to give your talk, and at least we can say that we have discussed these very difficult issues here today. And I think many of those issues that have been discussed yesterday and on Wednesday were brought up in a very good way today as well. So thank you very much, and thank you audience, and thank you for the questions and comments. Thank you.